I'm easily bothered by persistence. One step from lashing out at you. You want to get under my skin and call yourself a friend. I've got more friends like you. What do I do? Is there no standard anymore? What it takes, who I am, where I've been, belong. You can't be something you're not. Be yourself, by yourself, stay away from me. A lesson learned in life, known from the dawn of time. Respect, walk. What did you say? Respect, walk. Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me?
What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Nail That Tone, a series that's all about helping you guys achieve some of the most legendary guitar tones of all time. In this episode, we're talking about Dimebag Darrell's Vulgar Display of Power guitar tone, specifically about the song Walk. There's a lot of cool stuff to talk about, as always, so let's get right into it. As always with the Nail That Tone series, the first thing we're talking about is finger tone. For finger tone this week, since we're talking about the song Walk, the riff itself is pretty simple. The only thing to keep in mind is you want to be careful with the tuning here, because the tuning for this particular song is kind of in between drop D and drop C, so you kind of want to find that sweet spot to directly match the tuning and the tone of Dimebag Darrell. Another thing to keep in mind is the string gauge. Because we're in such a low tuning, I think it's important to at least go up one string gauge so that your strings won't be too loose when we're playing this particular riff. So I certainly recommend going up in string gauge, because it will make the recording process a lot easier, because your strings will just kind of stay in tune better, and they'll also just sound a bit better in that lower tuning. So now we're talking about the gear that was used on this particular record. Now, my research really consisted of a good website and kind of article that I found. The article does state and quote Dimebag Darrell himself a few times, so it does seem to be pretty credible. Now, the information I found on this article was that if we're talking about the amp side of things, Dimebag Darrell used the Randall Century 200 for this particular album. Now, I'm not too familiar with this amplifier. I just know that Randall certainly makes some good quality solid state amplifiers, so if you're into that sound, you definitely want to check out some Randall amplifiers. And for the guitar and other side of things, we see that the article states that Dimebag Darrell probably used his Dean from Hell, which is equipped with a Bill Lawrence XL 500 pickup. Again, I don't know too much about this pickup and certainly kind of the way it's voiced, but I do know that Dimebag Darrell did state that the pickup is certainly a big part of his sound. Now, this pretty informative article does state some of the other gear as well that was important to his sound, so I just wanted to quickly kind of just talk about a few things that I think were pretty important, especially when we talk about this particular album and this particular song. Now, in Dimebag Darrell's rack, it does state that he was using a Furman PQ4 parametric EQ, and that was used with his Century 200 amplifier. So this is pretty important when we talk about the next section, kind of how I was able to achieve a pretty similar Dimebag tone. So I think, again, the parametric EQ and kind of just taking out some of the frequencies is pretty important to his sound. And it also mentions a few different noise gates that he was into, so that's also a big part of the sound. That total kind of silence when the riff stops and that just big attack when it comes in is pretty important to his sound, and especially if we're talking about this particular song. So I just wanted to mention that. And the guitar article does go on to mention some other pretty cool things about, some other things that he was using, so you can go ahead and check out that article. I'll leave the link in the description. There's some great stuff on just his gear and just some really geeky stuff if you're into that kind of thing. So we're in Axe Edit 3 right now, checking out the Dimebag Darrell preset that I made. So I'm going over just the preset real quick. And for the first block, we have the input. Now I do have some aggressive gate settings here because the tone for this particular song is so dry that it kind of just starts and stops very quickly. So kind of that tightness is definitely something we want, and that dryness, at least that's kind of the way I would describe it. So I do have the setting for the gate like pretty high, much higher than you would normally use a gate. And as well, I have a graphic EQ here before we hit the amplifier, so I'm taking a lot of the lower frequencies out of the amplifier, so we get a much kind of drier, like kind of thinner sounding with not a lot of low end, because we can have some low end, and that's kind of implied with the lower tuning that we're in for this particular song, but we don't want too much of that. So I took out a lot of those frequencies before we even hit the amplifier. And for the amp settings as well, they kind of mimic that as well. And for amp type, I use the FAS 6160. I'm assuming that is a sort of a copy of a 5150 or a similar kind of amplifier, so that's kind of in the same amp category, I guess, as a Randall amplifier would be, just a high gain metal amplifier. And for gain, I actually have it a little bit lower than normal, because again, we want that dryness and we want it to kind of start and stop, and the more gain that we add, just like the more noise and that kind of stuff that we add to the sound. And for IR, I think I use 2 of my own IR captures. If you would like to try this preset, I would be happy to share it with you guys, but I don't know, again, if it will work with your setup, because it's kind of specific to the way I play and my guitar and all that kind of stuff. So for reverb, I did add a little bit, because when I first heard the isolated track, I thought I heard a little bit of room sound, so I decided to add just a tiny little bit. But in kind of hearing my own recording, I kind of regret using any reverb, because even just that little bit that I use is definitely audible, and I feel like it was definitely too much. So you could add maybe a 1% or 2%, but kind of going back, I would have re-recorded it. I just got kind of lazy and didn't want to re-record it, so I just kind of kept it like that. But yeah, I would definitely remove this block or just add just a tiny bit of reverb. And for the last block, I used just another graphic EQ where I got rid of some of the higher frequencies and just kind of dipped those a bit, because earlier I added quite a bit going into the amplifier. So that's pretty much it for the preset. Nothing too special about that, pretty basic. So now we're talking about what other gear you could use to get a similar sound if you don't happen to own a Randall or a Dean guitar. I would certainly recommend something similar in the solid state category, because Pantera and Dimebag Darrell's sound was kind of very solid state. So there's a good amount of brands that make some decent stuff, like Black Star or Line 6, or you could always go the Randall route. Again, these amplifiers shouldn't be too expensive, because solid state tends to be a little bit more, I guess, affordable. Maybe they're just a bit easier to make and manufacture. If you want to go for a similar sound but not the exact solid state sound, I would recommend using a 5150 or similar amplifier. You definitely want something with a good amount of gain, just a lot of aggression there. So I would say the 5150 is a pretty similar amplifier and could probably get you a similar Dimebag Darrell tone. When it comes to guitars, I would just recommend, of course, a humbucker guitar and something with a Floyd on it, because that was a pretty big part of Dimebag Darrell's sound, with the different kind of effects that he would get out of the whammy bar and that kind of thing. So you definitely want that if you're going for that sound. So I would recommend, again, anything with a humbucker and a Floyd Rose should get you pretty close to Dimebag Darrell's sound. Anyway guys, that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, comment, and consider subscribing. We release videos like these on a weekly basis, so hopefully guys, we'll see you in the next video.